Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the rereadability of books. If you're new around here, then you might not know, but I don't really reread books very much. I always intend to, and then I just never really do. And I've been sort of thinking about why that is, especially since this summer I saw a video posted by Sarah Hawkinson on her horror movie channel. It's called Possessed by Horror. I will link her video down below, but she basically was talking about how there are certain movies that she can rewatch over and over and over again, and there are other movies that she considers some of her favorite movies that she has only ever watched one time. And she sort of explored why she thinks that might be, especially because she was saying that she only really rewatches movies that are quote unquote bad instead of like really artistic, really well done, beautiful films. And so I was curious about like what I reread and why I think I reread things. And so a lot of the things that she talked about in her video I think are valid. So part of the reason she said she doesn't rewatch certain films is because they're too emotionally traumatic. And so you watch it the first time and you're so impacted by it, but it takes a lot of energy knowing that that's the way it's going to impact you to watch that again. She also talks about how some movies that are quote unquote bad are just like fun to watch and they're more entertaining. You don't really have to focus that much on them. Things like that. Since I saw her video, I've been sort of scheming and planning in my mind about like what I reread versus what I don't reread and why that might be. And this video is just gonna explore that a little bit. So if you're interested in this topic, leave a comment down below with like your most reread book, or if you even reread things at all. I know some people only reread, and I know some people don't really reread, especially on BookTube. I feel like rereading is kind of hard because you're trying to read so many things and all the new releases. But I would be curious to know if you reread or not. I think part of the reason I personally don't reread that much is because I'm on this platform and I'm learning more and more every day about different books that are coming out. And since there are so many things that I want to read, rereading almost feels like a waste of time or like a waste of a space on my TBR that I could put in something new, which I don't know if that's necessarily a healthy attitude to have. It's kind of like a productivity attitude, I guess, but it is what it is. That's something that I've noticed about myself. But before doing YouTube, I did have a few books that I like constantly went back to, and I kind of want to explore why that is. So I want to sort of talk about some of the things, first of all, that I do find myself rereading when I want to reread something. And what I've noticed about myself, especially in the past year, anything that I've reread pretty much since starting YouTube is sort of where I'm going with this. Anything that I've reread has been typically shorter, lighter in subject matter, and just something that's like easy to get through and makes me feel like good and happy and doesn't necessarily make me feel stressed or it's not very involved, I guess. The other thing that I typically find myself that I've reread throughout my life, even before starting YouTube, are things that I read when I was a kid. So like if I read a book when I was way younger, I have reread that more often. And part of that I do think is because I wasn't really involved in the bookish community online. And so I didn't hear that much about new releases. I owned a few books and those are the ones that I reread over and over again. And especially when I got a little older, I started rereading books that I read when I was a kid to see if I still liked them. And then the other reason I think I reread things is if I feel like I could get more out of it if I read it a second time. I've bought books with the purpose of rereading them because I've already read them and haven't reread. Spoiler alert. I don't think I've reread anything since I've been on YouTube except for Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which I originally read in high school and thought it was fine, but I really, really loved it on my reread. And I think part of that is because I was more familiar with the story, and also I had already read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen a few months before I reread Pride and Prejudice, and I'm doing a book club where we're reading all of her works in publication date order. We technically still have time for October/November's pick, which was Northanger Abbey. The live show will be Sunday the 14th. Just shameless plug, I'm reading it right now. I was just thinking about like books that I have not reread and books that I have reread, and there's some of my favorite books that I have not reread and I probably will never reread, but I want to go through some examples of things that I definitely don't reread. So I don't ever see myself rereading certain like thrillers because the point for me to read a thriller is to be like shocked by the twist kind of. And so I feel like rereading it, I wouldn't really get anything out of it the second time. I have not yet read a thriller that I think upon reread I would enjoy more, which is interesting because with thriller films, I often like to rewatch those because I feel like I can pick up on the clues better. But in the book, I for some reason don't. Some examples of this are Gone Girl, which is right there, as well as The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Both of those books I absolutely loved when I read them in high school. And neither of those I've picked up since. But I haven't even like considered rereading them just because they wouldn't impact me the same way. Like, it doesn't make sense for me to want to reread that. Another book series that I read last year that I absolutely loved, and I have all of them, I read The Three-Body Problem and that whole trilogy by Cixin Liu, and I don't think I'll ever reread those either. I loved those books when I read them, and I recommend them all the time to people because if you really want a good first contact with alien sci-fi, I think you would really enjoy them, but they're very science heavy and they're very dense, and I just don't see myself feeling the need to reread them, even though I absolutely love them and I would still consider them some of like my favorite books. I did want to give you an example of some things that I have reread or considered rereading and sort of why I've reread them. My most reread book of all time is actually A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This is my very banged up copy. I got this in school, or for school, and I have reread this. For a while I was rereading it every year. I have not done that still, but I haven't reread it in a few years. I think it's about time for me to pick it up. I might do the thing where I reread it at the beginning of next year or maybe in December. I haven't decided, but A Tale of Two Cities is one of my favorite books of all time, and it's not the type of thing that I think I would reread if I read it for the first time now, but because I read it when I was 15, and it was the first book that I'd read for school that I actually really enjoyed, I think that's why I reread it and go back to it, is because it's a place of comfort for me. For me, I just think it's one of those books that I think I can just reread over and over and over again, and I would be perfectly happy to do so. Another book that I read way more recently, and I actually reread twice while I had the loan out from my library. It's kind of embarrassing. I guess I only reread it once, and then another time I was like looking through for like my favorite parts. The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, which the movie is coming out sometime in November, I think. So if you're interested, you can still pick that up and read it. I highly recommend it if you like contemporary romance. I did not think I was going to love this one as much as I did, but I just found the like love story and the tropes used so heartwarming, and the chemistry between the characters. It was just like the perfect book for me, I think, which is why I found it so easy to reread, and I definitely think I would like buy that book so I could reread it again if I ever needed like a feel-good read, just because it's just a cute, easy, slightly smutty romance. Very simple to read. You know what's going to happen, so, but you also knew it was going to happen the first time. There's no like big surprises, big reveals that are ruined because you already know, if that makes sense. And then another book that goes along with my like, if you read it when you were a kid, you'll reread it over and over again if you really liked it and it made an impact on you. Yikes. Walk to Moons by Sharon Creech, I've reread over and over and over again. This was my favorite book when I was in elementary school and like middle school. I absolutely love this. It's about a little girl whose mother goes missing and she's looking for her mom. Basically, she's on this road trip with her grandparents telling them this story about her and her friendship with her friend, and her friend has like this weird family thing going on. So she's telling this story to her grandparents. So it's kind of like dual timeline because you go through the story from the past as well as being on this road trip with her and her grandparents. But I've since heard that this has like really terrible Native American representation and people like get really upset about that. And it won the Newbery Medal, which I think is a children's literature award. So I guess go into that at your own risk for that kind of thing. But I remember loving that book as a kid. It meant a lot to me, I think, because other than like before reading that, I hadn't read any books where children were treated like their emotions and their very deep emotions and complex emotions really mattered. And then I also have reread multiple times Looking for Alaska by John Green. That was the first John Green book that I read. I read it when I was way too young to read it. I think I was in like 4th grade. You should not read that when you're that young. But I was on like an older reading level, so I always read YA when I was in elementary school, which you shouldn't probably do, but it is what it is. But I remember in Looking for Alaska, that book is also a comfort read for me. And I know that people have a lot of like mixed feelings about the romanticization of mental health and things like that. But I felt really seen in that book, and I don't know, I really loved it. It helped me realize a lot of things about myself. And so I have reread that multiple times. The last time I read that, I think, was 2019 or 2020 when the show came out. Another thing that I think makes books really rereadable is being part of a series, because when the next book in the series comes out, you want to reread the last one so that you can catch up. And I specifically remember the Harry Potter books because I reread each of those so many times, waiting for the next book to come out. And right before it did, I would reread the whole series because usually one of my older sisters would get to read the book first. And then we would read it down in age order, so I was always last. But I reread those books so many times that you would think I would know them backwards and forwards and be sick of the story, but something about that too, that world is very nostalgic for me now. And so I think nostalgia really plays a role into rereading things as well. And I was thinking about this because it is Nonfiction November. I was trying to think about nonfiction books that I would reread, because I do have a whole right here behind the camera, a nonfiction shelf. And some of those I'm wondering if I should even keep, because there's several of those where I'm never going to reread them in all likelihood, either because I didn't really care for them or because I don't think I'm going to get anything out of them again. Memoirs, in particular, I love memoirs. I love to read them. I don't think I'll ever reread most memoirs. It's just not something that appeals to me, and I think it goes back to what Sarah Hawkinson was saying about the emotional, like, drainage that happens when you read something that's, like, traumatic or for her watch. But a lot of memoirs are written by people who experienced severe trauma, which is why they're writing a book about it. But I don't find it really necessary to reread because I remember their story without having to reread it. The only nonfiction I think that I have actually reread, I have right here. It's called The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin, and I haven't even like sat down and reread this in its entirety, but this just goes through tips and tricks on how to like make yourself happier, essentially. She was talking about how she just felt like she was in a rut in her life, and she wanted to each month make a new thing for herself to do to see if that improved her life. And it's just small things you can do in your life that really do improve it. And so I definitely have gone through this when I need to be reminded of things and like a refresher, and I just need to start over. There are other books that I think I could potentially reread for like educational purposes, but mostly I don't reread nonfiction very much. So I'd be interested if anyone does, because like I feel like self-help, I don't even know if I would say self-help is rereadable, but it's definitely referenceable. So that's the other thing that I was going to say in this video, is that I think some of the things that I reread, I don't even reread in their entirety. I just reference back to things that I really liked. I feel like this video has been a little bit rambly, but I just was trying to think about why some things I have reread and then other things I consider favorite books but will never reread. I've really been trying to analyze whether that's just because I'm doing YouTube now, or if it's because I just feel like once I've read a story, I'm done with it. Let me know in the comments down below if you reread things and what you have reread. And if you have any like ideas about why you reread certain things. My neighbor dropped by because they delivered my package to her mailbox. I don't remember what I was saying, but I guess this is gonna be my outro. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, do make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to, you can go ahead and subscribe to my channel because I do post 2 videos every single week. And I will see you in my next one. Bye!